Under the grand marble ceilings of the U.S. State Department in Washington, cameras clicked and flashes filled the room as U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stepped forward to greet Bolivia's president-elect, Rodrigo Paz. The two men exchanged firm handshakes, posing briefly for photographers before settling into what observers described as one of the most symbolically important meetings in recent U.S.-Latin America relations. Their encounter, while brief in visuals, carried weight in tone and timing. For Washington, the election of Rodrigo Paz, a centrist reformer pledging to rebuild Bolivia's democratic institutions, comes as a rare opening to reset ties with a nation that, for much of the past decade, had drifted closer to Beijing and Moscow. For La Paz, it was a chance to reintroduce itself to Washington as a partner seeking investment and recognition rather than confrontation. As the two leaders exchanged greetings, Rubio's words, though off-mic, appeared cordial. His hand gestures emphasized cooperation, not confrontation. Sources close to the State Department say the meeting focused on trade diversification, lithium development, and Bolivia's transition toward democratic stability. The agenda also touched on migration issues and the role of Bolivia in the regional fight against narcotics trafficking, a persistent concern for U.S. policymakers. The Bolivian president-elect, Rodrigo Paz, son of the late President Jaime Paz Zamora, has positioned himself as a pragmatic reformer aiming to balance Latin American solidarity with Western engagement. His Washington visit, coming just days after his electoral victory, was intended to signal alignment with democratic norms and economic openness. Analysts noted that his decision to travel to Washington before his inauguration was not just diplomatic formality, it was a statement of intent. As Rubio and Paz left the briefing room, the symbolic optics were unmistakable. Two leaders walking side by side, signaling a thaw after years of mistrust. The United States had long been critical of Bolivia's political direction under previous administrations, particularly those accused of curbing press freedoms and nationalizing foreign industries without transparent compensation. Now Washington sees an opening to re-engage with a new generation of Bolivian leadership willing to restore confidence in foreign partnerships. But this meeting was not just about bilateral relations. It unfolded within a broader context of Rubio's global diplomatic tour, one that has taken him across continents in a span of days. Just 48 hours earlier, he had been in Tokyo, Japan, walking alongside White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles toward Air Force One. The trip marked the continuation of a high-stakes diplomatic circuit aimed at solidifying U.S. alliances in Asia and Latin America simultaneously. That same week, Rubio was seen at Haneda Airport boarding the presidential aircraft bound for South Korea, where the Trump administration's foreign policy team was preparing for a critical summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Images captured in Busan showed Rubio standing beside President Donald Trump, both looking toward Xi in a moment thick with geopolitical significance, a visual tableau of power, diplomacy, and tension in equal measure. Observers noted that Rubio's dual presence, first in Asia alongside Trump and Xi, then in Washington welcoming a Latin American leader, underscored his growing role as a key architect of U.S. foreign policy in 2025. Once known primarily as a domestic political figure, Rubio has now evolved into a central figure navigating America's global strategy amid rapidly shifting alliances. For Washington insiders, this week reflected the convergence of two crucial diplomatic theaters, East Asia and Latin America. In Busan, the focus was on stabilizing trade relations and curbing military escalation between the world's two largest economies. In Washington, the focus turned southward to democratic renewal and resource diplomacy across Latin America, particularly Bolivia's vast lithium reserves, now a centerpiece of global energy competition. Bolivia's lithium, critical for electric vehicle batteries and renewable storage, represents a potential pivot point in global supply chains, one that both Washington and Beijing are keenly aware of. Under the previous Bolivian administration, Chinese firms secured significant mining contracts in the Uyuni salt flats, home to one of the largest lithium deposits on Earth. But with Rodrigo Paz's ascent, that balance may shift. U.S. officials have hinted at offering alternative investment frameworks that emphasize environmental standards and community engagement, an indirect challenge to China's dominance in South America's lithium corridor. During private talks, according to aides, Secretary Rubio emphasized Washington's commitment to mutual respect and economic sovereignty, pledging US support for Bolivia's institutional reforms and energy transition goals. His message, sources say, was clear: America is ready to partner, but on the foundation of transparency and democratic governance. For Rodrigo Paz, this visit also served a domestic purpose. At home, he faces a divided parliament and a wary electorate still recovering from political instability. His image, standing next to the US Secretary of State in Washington, was meant to project legitimacy and international recognition ahead of his swearing-in ceremony. The meeting thus blended foreign diplomacy with internal political signalling, reinforcing his narrative of national restoration through pragmatic engagement. The visual composition of the meeting was deliberate: a measured handshake, a slow walk past the press corps, brief smiles exchanged beneath the State Department emblem. In Washington's coded language of diplomacy, such moments matter. They signal alignment, reassurance, and the quiet revival of trust between two nations long separated by ideological divides. Rubio's staff later released a short statement affirming that the discussions had been productive and forward-looking, noting shared goals on governance, climate adaptation, and counter-narcotics cooperation. No new agreements were signed, but officials hinted at upcoming talks involving trade envoys and development agencies in early 2026. In Tokyo, meanwhile, footage of Rubio's earlier movements provided the broader framing for this week's whirlwind diplomacy. Standing beside Susie Wiles, the White House Chief of Staff, at Haneda Airport, Rubio appeared focused and uncharacteristically subdued, a reflection of the delicate negotiations ahead in Busan. The Japan stop was primarily logistical, but it also symbolized Washington's deepening coordination with Pacific allies ahead of the Trump-Xi bilateral discussions. By the time Rubio appeared in Busan, the tone had shifted entirely. Cameras captured him watching intently as President Trump greeted Xi Jinping at Gimhae Air Base. The exchange was brief but tightly choreographed. Both leaders maintained measured expressions as aides hovered nearby. Rubio's presence in that frame underscored Washington's intent to link its Asia and Latin America strategies under a cohesive diplomatic vision, one that places energy, security, and trade at the center of a recalibrated US global posture. In Washington, these global threads came together in subtle but telling ways. As Rubio welcomed Rodrigo Paz, analysts drew parallels between America's approach to Bolivia and its broader strategy toward middle power nations: support reformist governments, counterbalance Chinese influence, and invest in sustainable infrastructure. For US policymakers, Latin America is no longer viewed through the narrow lens of aid and narcotics control. It is now part of a global equation involving technology supply chains, rare minerals, and climate resilience. This evolution in tone is not accidental. Since assuming the role of Secretary of State earlier this year, Marco Rubio has made it a point to redefine American diplomacy with a mix of moral clarity and strategic pragmatism. His speeches emphasize values and sovereignty, yet his engagements, whether in Busan or Washington, reveal a realist streak focused on maintaining influence through partnerships rather than unilateral dominance. For Bolivia, the meeting marked a pivotal moment in its international reintroduction. After years of strained ties and diplomatic isolation, the sight of its president-elect standing in Washington's State Department signaled a turning point. It was an image meant for both domestic audiences and international observers, a message that Bolivia is ready to return to the global stage, this time as a democratic and economically open nation. As the cameras faded and the two delegations departed, the scene closed on a note of quiet optimism. Outside, the Washington sky was pale and cold, but inside the State Department corridors, a sense of renewal lingered. Diplomacy, after all, is often written in gestures more than words: a handshake, a walk, a look that suggests the past can be reshaped into something new. In the coming months, follow-up meetings between Bolivian and US officials are expected to take place in La Paz and Washington, with a focus on trade access, environmental cooperation, and counter-narcotics frameworks. Whether these talks yield tangible results remains to be seen. But for now, the symbolism stands. A nation once estranged from Washington is once again shaking hands at its marble gates, under the watchful eye of a Secretary of State intent on reweaving America's global network, one quiet meeting at a time.